Welcome back. U.S.-China trade tensions. President Trump is threatening to raise tariffs if Chinese President Xi Jinping does not meet with him at the G20 summit. The president spoke about this yesterday in the negotiations.
Right now, we're getting 25% or $250 billion worth of goods. It's a lot of money is pouring into our treasury. We've never gotten 10 cents from China. Now we're getting a lot of money from China. And I think that's one of the reasons that GDP was so high in the first quarter, because of the tariffs that we've taken in from China. We always have the option to raise it another $300 billion at 25%, and the 25% could be much higher than 25%.
Joining me right now is the White House Council of Economic Advisors Chairman Kevin Hassett. It's great to see you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks very much for joining us. What about this China story? I mean, if the president does not meet with Xi Jinping and he puts the additional tariffs on China, wouldn't that hurt the U.S. economy as well?
Well, I think that what the president was talking about, now I'll get directly to your question in a sec, but is that we've got a G20 meeting coming up, and there's a plan to have the two presidents meet. And the last time that happened, then they made an enormous amount of progress getting us close to a China deal. In fact, you know, it was a little more than a month ago where we in the White House mostly thought that we were just about all the way there for a deal. And I think that the president is eager to get that started again. And he's serious, though, if we don't make any progress with that, to use tariffs to level the playing field with China.
Kevin, Steve Forbes here.
Hey, Steve.
How are you?
Good morning.
Tariffs are sales taxes. How is that going to help the American economy, putting taxes on across the board, not to mention auto taxes perhaps coming up? This hurts us. They may hurt more, but we're hurt too. Already investment is being held back by many companies because they don't know what the rules of the road are.
Yeah, you know, Steve, I think, first of all, it's not just about tariffs. I think that if you saw Maria's previous segment where she talked to the Huawei representative, you know, there's been a heck of a lot of misbehavior by Chinese firms that we're trying to get ahead of. Right?
We know about the misbehavior.
And everybody wants to fix it in the past, but they haven't been able to. And I think that by putting tariffs on the table, you know, we've estimated that maybe $400 or $500 billion a year through forced technology transfer and intellectual property theft is taken out of the U.S. economy because of bad deals we made in the past. So what we want to do is we want to reform those deals. And then let's go to the tax incidence point that you make, Steve, that if we put a tax on China and if we don't buy it from China, or a tariff on China, if we don't buy it from China, we can buy it from Vietnam or some other guy if there's a close substitute, then the harm to us is very small, but the harm to them is large. And if you look at the list of things that we put tariffs on first, they're basically all sorted to put maximal pressure on them and minimal pressure on us. And I think that's why, if you look at, say, the consumer price index data, that there hasn't been a boost in inflation that might follow if your argument was relevant for the first round of tariffs that we put
Kevin,
on.
we understand all that, but let's just look at the facts on the economy. Things are slowing down, right? So you've got nervousness about the tariffs, and that's one reason that corporate executives are once again sitting on cash, unwilling to put it to work because they're not sure how this is going to turn out. There's that. We already saw weakness in manufacturing. The global PMIs are dropping, not just in the U.S., but across the world. So what are you going to do about an economy slowing down and potentially threatening to take away all of the strength and the upside that you got from the tax legislation?
Well, again, we had a little bit north of 3% first quarter. It looks like second quarter is going to be around 2%. You're right that the jobs number was a little bit weak, but about half that weakness, we chalked up to weather because of all the floods in the Midwest. And so, I'm not willing to change my forecast for 3% for this year. There's a lot of positive stuff, like the purchasing managers for services. The NFIB put out a really blockbuster survey this morning. So small businesses are booming, and so I haven't really seen anything in the U.S. that gets me off the trajectory that I was in, say, in January. But you're right about the rest of the world. I think that Asia is looking very slow, and I think it's in part because China needs to come to the table on tariffs, and Europe is looking very slow as well, and I think that's probably related to uncertainty over Brexit.
Kevin, it's Dagan McDowell, but the Federal Reserve is clearly looking at a possible rate cut later this year. Why would the Federal Reserve be cutting rates if the economy is doing great? Or even okay?
As you know, it's my job not to give the Federal Reserve advice. The one thing I can say is that if, as an abstract principal in a classroom, I were at the Fed, the thing I would be looking at would be the unemployment rate, which is low, and inflation, which is low. And I think that with inflation low and decelerating, in part because the weakness around the world is causing us to import deflation, then I think that the pressure on the Fed to keep rates high, in that type of circumstance would be a lot lower.
Is the weaker spot the consumer or business that you're worried that you want to watch?
Right now, the weakest spot over the last couple of months has been business. In fact, the thing about consumers that going ahead is that consumers got a significant pay raise. Like even with the slightly weaker jobs report, we had wage gains north of 3 for a sustained period for the first time since 2009. And when you get wage gains like that, then what happens is people go out and buy stuff. And we haven't seen the consumer surge that you normally get with the income surge. And I think it's one reason why there's kind of like an insurance policy underneath the forecast for how bad it could get, because we haven't seen the consumption part, that follows income growth usually.
Kevin, I know you're on your way out. How much longer in this role?
Oh, yeah, sure. So the president and I talked about it a few weeks ago. I agreed to stay on and help the transition through the end of the month. And, it's, as you can see, a very amicable parting. The CEA chair usually leaves after about 2 years, and I think it's time for me to maybe eat kale and do yoga for a while.
Who's going to take your spot, Kevin?
The president has a number of solid candidates on his desk, and I think that you'll likely see an announcement sometime very soon.
Kevin, good to have you on the program this morning. Thank you.
Thanks, Maria. Thanks.
Kevin Hassett joining us.